Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Politics and Prose. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, and we are very excited and delighted to be hosting journalists Katie Benner and Erica Green, who are here to talk about their new book, Miracle Children, Race, Education, and a True Story of False Promises. Katie and Erica are both reporters for the New York Times. Katie, after hired by the Times about a decade ago, initially covered technology, but since 2017, she's been writing about the Department of Justice. And she was part of a team that won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service in 2018 for coverage of workplace sexual harassment. Erica joined the Times in 2017, spent about 6 years covering education, then moved to the White House beat. With Wes Moore, now, of course, Maryland's governor, Erica co-authored a book in 2020 called 5 Days about the riots that erupted in Baltimore in 2015, triggered by the death in police custody of Freddie Gray. A little more than 7 years ago, Katie and Erica co-wrote an article that exposed a celebrated tiny private school in Louisiana for, well, essentially being too good to be true. T.M. Landry College Preparatory School, which served mostly black working class children, had an amazing record of sending its graduates to top universities. And scenes of Landry students opening their acceptance letters from schools like Harvard and Yale were broadcast on television and in viral videos. But the investigation by Katie and Erica showed that the Academy's success was a lie. Student transcripts had been falsified and college application essays were filled with fabricated tales of students overcoming deprivation and parental neglect. Worse still, the school's leaders, Mike and Lucy Landry, had fostered a culture of fear marked by physical and emotional abuse. T.M. Landry, Katie and Erica write, was more scam than school, an institution designed to prey on the community's collective longing for a piece of the American dream. And now, 7 years later, Katie and Erica provide in their book an even fuller account of the scandal. The book's riveting, illuminating, and truly heart-wrenching. And it goes beyond just an expose of the school, arguing the lesson here isn't just that a couple of deceitful school proprietors gamed the system, but the education system itself is fundamentally inequitable, and a tendency in America to play up individual stories of successful people of color enabled the scam. As the New York Times review of the book put it, quote, "Much as you can't cheat an honest man, the Landry confidence game required a college admissions culture that saw poor black children as trophies more than people." Now, in conversation with Katie and Erica, we're very pleased and honored to have the prominent civil rights attorney, Vanita Gupta, who served in the Biden administration as Associate Attorney General and in the Obama administration as DOJ's civil rights, head of DOJ's Civil Rights Division. Throughout her accomplished legal career, Vanita has proven herself not only committed to, but passionate about matters of political justice. She first rose to national prominence after law school, working at the Legal Defense Fund, then at the American Civil Liberties Union, and she went on to head the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. She's now a distinguished scholar in residence at NYU's Law School. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Katie Benner, Erica Green, and Vanita Gupta.
Thank you. Well, it's great to see all of you, especially thank you for coming out on Friday of MLK weekend, which feels particularly appropriate. Really glad, and I'm so honored to be here with Katie and Erica. This is really an incredible book. I read it over the holidays, and I can't stop thinking about it, to be honest. And it's a story that I'm so glad you're retelling in this way to the country and the world. And I wanted to start by asking you how you first learned about T.M. Landry. How did the school come on your radar?
So I was covering the Justice Department, Erica was covering education, and I got a tip from a former federal prosecutor. It's not on my beat at all, keep in mind, but she knew somebody whose daughter was enrolled at TM Landry, and they had heard about things happening inside of the school that were really disturbing and distressing. So they reached out to this woman and described what was happening, and she drove to the school. She was just in Texas to meet with some families. And on her way back home, she called, and it was very unusual to get a call from a source that late at night. And she said, I know this isn't really quite on your beat, but I think something really wrong is happening here. And she was describing it to me, how the students claimed they were being asked to trade in basically negative racial stereotypes for a shot at going to college, at the way they were being treated. I thought this does feel like a story that would tell us so much about race in America, so much about education. But then I called Erica because she's the expert, and I said, what do you think of this? And when can you go to Louisiana and meet some of these folks?
Yeah.
Well, tell us.
Yeah.
Does that story comport,
It
Erica?
does. It is. That is accurate, except she is leaving out a lot of drama.
Okay.
She called and said, Erica, you know those viral videos of the students getting into colleges?
I can totally hear her
Yes.
in that voice. Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, I love those videos. We both had seen them, shared them. As an education reporter, I was very excited about them. And she said, what if I told you they may not be real? And I refused to believe such a thing. And she told me that in order to, believe such a thing, there was a group of parents who were willing to tell their stories. And how quickly could I get to Louisiana? That was a Wednesday. I got to Louisiana by Friday, and unfortunately found out that was in fact the case. And obviously I can't even say the videos were real, but one of my favorite lines of the story we wrote ultimately from this reporting was like the joy was real that the students had experienced when they got these acceptance letters, but everything that had led up to that was indeed false and worse.
How many of you remember seeing those videos yourselves? Do you remember? Because I remember seeing them. Yeah. Were you nervous about revealing the story as a scam, like what had happened? Given it's the South, there's deep racial inequality, I'm saying the very obvious here. Deep segregation in the schools. I'm just curious about, as you start digging in, and probably it mirrored, Erica, some of your initial feeling when you first learned that this could be a scam, but how did you feel as reporters as you start to uncover this, what it was going to be like to tell the truth in a national newspaper?
So fortunately or unfortunately, there is video of us wrestling with this because the New York Times wanted to make a TV show about the reporting of this. Hi, Aaron. Wanted to make a TV episode about this story and the reporting of it because we had a short-lived television show called The Weekly. So when we were going through our notes and talking about some of the fallout that could happen, we really did think about it a lot. Mm-hmm. Erica and I have a couple of moments that unfortunately were aired on Hulu where we were really wrestling with the idea of, is it worth it to expose what's happened and what it says about racial inequality and what the idea that Black people would be coerced into or convinced that they should be trading in their safety and their dignity for opportunity, and that's the bargain you're making in America, that's your path. Weighing that against, really, we were worried getting multiple students kicked out of college.
Yeah.
And even if they didn't get kicked out of college, really, I think we all viscerally remember what it's like to be 19 and 20, really, really, really doing some serious damage, emotional and otherwise, because how horrible would that be?
She's downplaying it. We were like distraught. It was, I mean, I quit the story like 5 times and she had to bring me back. That happened during the book too. No, I mean, as an education reporter, you know, we have a kind of a mantra that's very similar to doctors. Like it's like a first do no harm, because kids and families and futures are so at stake. So it was just, you know, we knew it was a story we needed to tell. We knew what the consequences would be, and could be. We had to reach out to all of these colleges who were clearly not happy to hear from us, because they were concerned about their own reputations and how it reflected on them. But to their credit, they were very concerned about the students as well. And you know, for me, I also wrestled with the fact that, you know, I was about to write a story that was going to reinforce what so many people on these campuses already thought about these kids being there. That weighed heavily on me. You know, if you're at Harvard or Stanford or Yale, you're from Louisiana, people already question how you got there and whether you should be there and whether you earn the right to be there. So I didn't want to reinforce that, and also, you know, I didn't want to ruin kids' chances, right? Like it was that, you know, adults did this, and that's another thing in education reporting. You know, you hold, you know, we hold adults accountable for what they do to children. And at the end of the day, you know, that story, the banner across the Times, was all of the kids' faces. And people remember Mike and Tracy, but it's their faces that will go down in history as the face of that scandal. And that also weighed very heavily on us.
Yeah. Thank you for both of you for being honest about that, because even as I was reading it, I was feeling some of that tension. And I want to come back to the students, of course, but I'm curious. So you publish these groundbreaking stories, and what was the reaction of the community locally about the New York Times exposing this school in a smaller town in Louisiana?
So I'll just talk about the reaction that we found out about, because Mike and Tracy, the owners of the school, knew that we were working on a story that would say that they had harmed students physically, mentally, and emotionally, and they were also working on a story saying that they created fraudulent transcripts and activities that the students had never participated in, and falsified their life stories in order to get them into colleges by trading basically in really negative stereotypes about Black people. So they organized a meeting for the remaining parents at the school. There were still about 40-something students left. And that reaction, that frank, candid reaction that was secretly recorded so that Erica and I could later listen to it, thank you to that source, was one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard. A lot of the conversation was, if Mike can still get our kids into these schools and still get them these opportunities, what is the big deal? Are you telling me that there aren't white families buying their kids' way into college right now? Are you telling me there aren't white families that aren't paying somebody to write their kid's entire college application? Are you telling me that nobody else has ever cheated this system? Are you telling me that this isn't what the most privileged people in America do every day? So no, if he can still get our kids, and that's what they kept saying to him, will the Ivies still take us? And if they won't, who will? Because if the names you're giving us are good enough, we won't leave you, because who else is going to get us in? And of course, we all know there are plenty of white students who are in colleges, great colleges, who probably didn't do very well on their SATs, who might not have passed all of their classes, but got in somehow, and they were cognizant of that too. So the fact that there were so many people willing to stand by Mike was, I thought, just such a fascinating response to the story in the town. And then, of course, for, as Erica said, the parents who came to us and who spoke with her, they had a very different reaction.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the parents' reaction?
Yeah, I mean, the parents came to us, and I can tell you, like, you're emphasizing, like, the New York Times goes into a small
Yes,
town
you got
with a
you
small
got that
school.
emphasis.
Yeah, and it's like, and we got some of that, and I get it. When these big national newspapers swoop into towns, drop a grenade and then go back on up where they came from. Sorry, I'm a local education reporter at heart, and I would be in Baltimore City covering stories and would really despise when the Washington Post or the New York Times came in and decided to do their thing. But no, I mean, we got some of that. It was, it was like, why are you picking on us? For me as a Black reporter, I got, why are you trying to take down a Black man? I'm just keeping it real. And the families got that too. I mean, it was like, they've done so much for you. How could you do this? They were accused of seeking fame. Someone said to me, they were like, I hope you made your career off this story. And I just sent them like a Google link of my stories and my career. But people like thought we had these nefarious like intentions. But look, the scoreboard is what it is. Like, I had written tons of stories like this. Katie and I had covered civil rights infractions together. She had her own record, and it was perfect that it was a justice and education reporter doing this story. It was the perfect, unfortunately, intersection of both of those things failing miserably. So yeah, the families dealt with a lot of like, how could you do this to us, and what's in it for you, but they were very sure, and they were very confident, they were very comfortable with exposing themselves, right? And it wasn't that they were just exposing Mike. And they had reached out to their local news media. They reached out to the Board of Education. They had gone to every resource in their own community. And if it weren't for our source, I mean, I don't know. Well, no, if I had gotten emailed this, we would have done it. But like, they actually had someone who was connected to the New York Times, which is rare. And they would not have been afforded. So yeah, but they were good with it. They were, and they were particularly happy and nervous, and they knew that it would be consequential. But there were so many questions after the story published. It was like, how could the parents not know? Why did they do this? Why did they trust this man? What was going on in their heads? And so when we told them that we were going to do a book, they were totally on board because they wanted people to actually know the answer to all of those questions. So yeah, it was. I will say, Varsity Blues. It was 1 month. Yeah. So we had like a 2-week time frame where we were like on the defense, and then Varsity Blues came out and everyone was quiet. So. Yeah.
So it sounds like then you knew that you wanted to write a book as you were doing the reporting, or so why you guys have written incredible stories before, both of you have done investigative stories. Why did you write a book?
I mean, I think there were some issues, especially on race, that were so nuanced and complicated that they really couldn't happen in a newspaper story. Like, even thinking about why parents were letting their children be treated this way, why some of these, I mean, the students were cognizant of what was happening to them. They're being screamed at, emotionally abused. They're watching their peers get physically punished in ways that are egregious. They're being physically punished. And they too have their own reasons for doing things. And so much of them are wrapped up in really hard conversations about race that we couldn't even address really in the time story, and given that the history of segregation education is so much of the reason why we even got a school like TM Landry, it just felt like if we wanted to explore those sorts of things, it had to happen in a book. And then, like with all people who write books, you regret doing it immediately upon signing the contract.
Yeah.
I see Mark's in the back, and he's working on a book right now, and he looks very much
very
like he
tired.
regrets it. Yeah, I mean, he's very exhausted back there. So writing. I'm not going to get into the writing a book is hard. Whatever, everybody knows that. It's just if you wanted to have a nuanced conversation about especially race, you can't do it even in a 3,000 word New York Times story.
So just to kind of dig in a little bit more, because I do think the book does a pretty remarkable job of telling students individual stories and experiences, and really bringing to life the kinds of decisions parents were making by sending their kids there. But there's also interspersed really important historical context of the history of segregation in education in Louisiana in particular. And I think importantly also, a lot is said about the college admissions process, of course. And having written this book, what takeaways, who is the audience that you want to read this book? And are there people in I'll break up my question. I'm gonna ask you about college admissions after, but which audiences do you want to read this book?
You're the first person to ask that.
Really?
Yeah.
Do you want college admissions folks to read this book? I want college admissions folks to
Yeah.
read this book. I mean, aside from you want it to be a bestseller, I'm saying there's actual lessons and things to think about in terms of the misincentives that are structured into the college admissions process that make a TM Landry, for a lot of communities, maybe not the right choice, but perhaps a reasonable one.
I mean, I think that I would want anybody who wants to better understand why they're seeing the current events they're seeing today, if they want to better understand why these things are happening, I think a book like this book and others are a really good thing to read. And I know it doesn't sound immediately like that because it's such a specific story about a school in Louisiana, about college admissions and opportunity through education. But it's also, and you see this in some of the history, it's the story of how the country is in a constant push-pull about how we feel about having a racial caste system. Do we want it or do we not? And that fight, there's no rest, okay? There is no rest. There is no such thing as winning that fight because there's never going to be consensus around racial equality, at least not right now in America, and that's what we're seeing, why we're seeing this undoing. So to see that history play out just through the topic of education, right? We fight a war to end, a devastating war. We have an extremely hopeful period during Reconstruction where not just education flourishes for Black people, there are Black congressmen, there are all sorts of politicians who are Black, and there are communities that are starting to grow. Then you have Jim Crow and the rise of the KKK. You have, I mean, just battle after battle. It's one battle after another, if you will. Battle after battle. And I think that if we want to understand why we're having them, that's one of the big takeaways from this book. You cannot legislate people's hearts. You cannot legislate their beliefs. So you need the legislation in place so we can do other kinds of work. But there is a reason, too, why there are so many forces trying to undo all of that progress today. So that's, I feel like, so the audience is actually, I think, broader than what you might think just from the topic.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't know how the bestseller situation works. I just hope people who want to learn stuff, they read it. But I want anyone who touches the life of a child to read it, especially a Black child, because I'm a miracle child. I have this whole, this background. I've overcome so much. And as I was writing this book, I could think about at least a dozen adults in my life who shepherded me along the way who could have used this book. So college admissions counselors, I definitely want to read it because, they are the ones who read a college essay from a T.M. Landry and not realize that it had been submitted 3 times 3 years before, like literally verbatim. uh, they need to have a gut check about what it is that they are expecting and looking for from specific demographics of students. If they're looking for trauma porn, I want them I want them to be challenged. If they're looking for adversity from a Black student, or but achievement and flourishing from a white one or an Asian one, I want them to think deeply about that. But, in the book, you'll see that students have encountered guidance counselors who discourage them from pursuing a certain school because they had a certain expectation of what they could achieve. And that's huge. Your high school guidance counselor, they send you when you're at a crossroads. They send you one way or another, and they tell you what's possible. The students encountered teachers who literally said, "You're never going to be anything." Um, and so I think it has a broad audience, but there's also just mentors. I can think of like so many people who took me under their wing, and I'm so appreciative of it. But was there like reductivist language? Were they like proud to to oversee the nurturing of this like broken child? Yes. Was it well intentioned? Absolutely. And so, but I just think that anybody who shepherds a young person on their path needs to just really challenge their assumptions and their beliefs and their convictions that really stem from a system that always, particularly for Black children, started from a deficit.
So, Mike Landry to me cuts a pretty complicated and striking figure. And this is a little bit picking up, Eric, on what you're talking about, which is, the book talks a lot about the structural inequalities and the history, as I said. And some might say there's this expression, don't hate the player, hate the game. How much in your own reporting and writing of this book were you thinking about, was Mike Landry himself a victim of the same forces, or was he just exploiting the kids? Did he start from the right place and end up getting corrupted because of the incentive system? Was it complicated, or am I just asking crazy questions?
No, I think there are ways that he's really complicated. We can't be in his head, so I don't think we can say,
Yeah.
oh, he started with a great intention and got great. I mean, those are all things we can surmise as reporters and as readers, but I think to definitively say what's going on in that man's head is probably not, it will never be truly accurate. But I think that one of the great things about reporting this over so many years is that we got to watch the students themselves wrestle with what they'd done and why they'd done it, and their own thoughts about Mike Landry, and they change over time. And there's actually, I think, Mike, he did grow up very, very poor in a small town in Louisiana. He has what he, in his description, which is unreliable, but that he had a pretty remarkable story where education is what allowed him to leave what he called rats and roaches welfare to go on to go to college and then become a teacher. He has this moment where in his life story where he goes on and works at Dean Witter, and he's a stockbroker, and then he becomes a teacher because he's passionate about education. Again, he is not a reliable narrator. However, if you're a college admissions officer or if you're the parent of a child who wants to see your kid succeed, that's a very inspiring story. And so there's actually one of the students says something I think really, really smart about this. Again, these students, they gave every smart thing in this book is said by one of the students.
Yeah.
But, after time goes by, one of the students, Sam, He says, if you really listened, Mike's rhetoric wasn't that convincing. Mike wasn't an outstanding salesman, this guy who convinced anybody that anything is possible. What he was selling was just something that you want to believe in so much that you're subconsciously willing to overlook the abnormalities. It's not like the things he said didn't come true. We did get into college. We were willing to subconsciously overlook everything else, to have a stake in that belief. And so were the admissions officers. And so were the people like us who watched those college acceptance videos and cheered. It was only through the writing of this book that we really thought about what it says, that the entire country comes out to cheer when a Black child gets into Stanford. But if like a white kid from Northwest DC got into Stanford and it was a video, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't go viral. And so, but what is it about our expectations? Where are they set for Black people that becomes a celebration for the whole country?
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment where I called Katie and I was like, oh man, like, what if Mike Landry isn't the biggest villain in this story? And, because he did, such horrible things. And I say that with, police records and evidence to support it. And so, look, there were students who believe that, I'm sorry, I know I was supposed to, who said, look, like he had this like eye for an eye mentality, and they definitely subscribe to that. They were like, we do know that there is a white school across Louisiana that's a private wealthy school where they are, being coached or pushed or whatever to do exactly what we're doing, and that they believe the system was rigged. I mean, so he did say things that resonated with them, not only because he convinced them, but because they had experienced it. And there's one main character who Katie just did a beautiful job of laying that out. I won't ruin it for you, but they knew it because they knew it because they were Black in America. Mike, they gamed a rigged system, and they all, they understood that there was some element of that to it. Mike Landry, though, and I don't know what's in his head either, but the evidence shows that his original mission to help Black students morphed into something else as the school grew, as more people believed in him, as more families flocked to him, and
colleges
started to validate them,
and him
in particular, yeah. And so and that is evident, and I won't ruin it, but you'll see in the end what his mission changed. So yeah, I mean it's hard to say whether he's just, he was the symptom of a problem. I actually think Alicia's essay actually sums this up really well. Let's read the part.
I'll be finding that well, Vanita.
It's at the end.
I'm going to open it up.
So ask her questions.
I want to open it up.
She answers it better than I can.
Yeah, it was like,
the very end.
Just as you're looking, Erica, is there it must have been odd. You reported in 2018, and then you're writing for the last couple of years, revisiting the lives of the students that are pretty deeply profiled in this book. Can you just talk to us about this? And then I'm going to come to the audience for any questions they have. But tell us a little bit about the experience of revisiting their lives these many years on after the story had broken, years before.
Yeah. So we signed on to do this book. Yep, that's it. Okay.
November of 2019.
19. So we signed on to do it, and then 3 months later, the world fell apart. So COVID hit. Their lives drastically changed. Our lives drastically changed for a bit. And we just, we really persisted. And, I I think now that if this book had come out when it was due in 2021, I don't know. It's a whole different life. But, it would not have done as much of a service as it does now. But we kept in touch with them throughout the whole thing. We followed them for years as they, left. Some of them dropped out of college. Some of them finished during COVID. They had children. And you just watch them. It was absolutely fascinating to watch them. They were kids when we met them, and they were all bonded together by this like facade of a dream that someone had forced onto them. And it was amazing to kind of watch them grow into the lives that they actually wanted. Not everybody wanted to go to Harvard or Stanford. Like, they wanted to go to University of Louisiana. They wanted to go to HBCUs, which they were barred from going to because Mike Landry didn't allow them to apply to HBCUs because he saw them as inferior to white schools. But they were so much happier there. They built families, and they just, all they, ever wanted to do, they're from the South. They value family. They wanted to raise their own families, even, and start companies. And they had time to actually process what had happened to them. So we in 2018, we had the raw, visceral, emotion of it all, but also being able to document how they made sense of it and what impact it had on the national dialogue was absolutely fascinating. It was also incredibly traumatic. I mean, they wanted to move. They did the New York Times thing. It was big for them. It was big for their town. It had, people, a lot of the students had struggled mentally with the impact of that story. Some of them, they still do as young adults. But yeah, it was, we had to take breaks because it was just difficult to go back and relitigate and relive the trauma of what they had experienced and observed. But they did it because they believed in the book, and they just also wanted to have the last word. What was that passage?
No. Well, let's take questions.
Let's
Okay.
take some questions.
Okay, fine.
Don't be shy.
This is Washington, D.C., so if there are no questions, I am in shock. That does not make any sense. Hi. No, it's fine. Good. Allison's
Could you
questions.
please read the passage?
So I think that, again, the students themselves, I think one of the great things about doing the book, too, is that when you're a reporter, you meet a student and then you talk to like 15 experts who tell you why what happened. And you hope for the best. In this case, there's so much specificity. The students tell you why the things that happened. And in their telling, I think we learned so much. So there was a woman who she was pushed to go to Yale. Unfortunately for her, or fortunately, our story came out right before early decision. So she didn't apply to Yale because the Ivies were no longer going to take T.M. Landry students. She actually ended up going to Xavier, and she graduated from Xavier. She works at Bank of America now. She's really happy. And I think that she feels very fortunate she didn't go to Yale and that she went to an HBCU. And she said that if there's any lesson that T.M. Landry taught her, it was the reality of this enduring truth. We see education as a gift to be bestowed upon Black students instead of a public good to be accessed. When you have these miracle students who pull themselves up by their bootstraps, you don't have to think about systematic oppression. And that's just wrong because you're doing a huge disservice to every other student. Yeah. So, like I said, every smart thing in the book.
I know. Yeah.
Powerful.
Yeah. Okay.
So another benefit of having waited a little bit to do the book is that you can see what happened to Mike and Tracy, and one of the, shocking things is that they were never held accountable. I mean, we were talking about this a little bit before the event. What does that say about our system and this particular situation?
Oh, that's a question for Vanita.
What?
The law, the
Don't turn the
prosecutor.
tables on me.
sorry, the litigator over here. Like, I don't know, Vanita. Why did it work this
Okay,
way?
go ahead.
But there's another. So see, this is why I have a copy of the book with all these things marked, because other people answer these questions so much better for us. But one of the things this book doesn't give us is the escape hatch. So, there's a woman named Imani Perry who's a professor now at Harvard. She was at Princeton. And she said that these kinds of videos that we all passed around, that they gave all the people who celebrated these achievements an escape hatch from America's grinding racial reality. She said, Black American exceptionalism sustains American mythologies of perfect democracy and unfettered possibility, which is why we're so used to stories like this happening with justice being done at the end. That's a really popular thing. That's what popular culture is filled with, and that's what we wanted. That's how we wanted this book to end, but it had to end the way it ended in reality. So it means that when you read this, you don't get to have that escape from racial reality. You don't get to have a release valve, because neither did the families. And I think that that's something that's so interesting about real stories versus the fiction that we love. We were just saying the other night, it always stars Will Smith.
Oh,
Like these,
yeah.
all his movies with Will Smith.
Yeah.
This can't be
Like
a Will
the
Smith
hero
movie.
at the end. Yeah, if everyone had read this and was like, "Oh, great, they went to jail," the system worked. It just doesn't for everybody, and of course, it's like if this were like an all-white school in Amish country or something, like, would it have been different? I'm not going to answer that because I don't know for sure. But like, they went to the authorities. This is documented well before we got there. And it's also cyclical, because in the end, everyone felt bad for them. Everyone felt bad for them again, but no one remedied the harm. So, as is often the case throughout history, they got their own sense of justice that they could live with. And that is memorialized
In the book.
in their book.
I also have a related accountability question. And thank you so much for your book and your work. And as I was sitting here, I just remembered being an international student myself and coming to the US to go to college, and suddenly realizing that, my classmates' parents were so ecstatic that I was there, because their kids were having a great experience, and they asked me questions in very slow English repeatedly, and wanted to be reassured that I'd come from India, and it just made me realize who college was for and who was there for other people, right? And then, many years later, I was a public defender in Atlanta, and the APS school cheating scandal was going on, and all of those Black educators were prosecuted. And all of us public defenders were pulling out our hair thinking, you're prosecuting our 17 and 16-year-old clients. And they went to these schools, and so like, what the fuck, man? Like, let these cases go. And then there was a parade. It was an 8-month-long trial of Black educators. And so I'm just wondering, sort of like with those two experiences, just wondering like what remedying the harm, I think to your point of like this sort of, what remedying the harm looks like and what accountability looks like, right? Or are our structures currently so broken that we don't have a way to redress the harm, and the only thing you can do is repeatedly tell stories about it to call into validity the questions that were sort of foundationally based on, like what would remedying the harm have looked like? What would the students have wanted? What would you have wanted to see? And what, at the risk of asking a very big question, like what is your vision for, things like this not happening, or education moving maybe 2 steps towards something that's more just and equitable?
That's a great question. Katie and I talk so much about the Atlanta cheating scandal because and I was a reporter in Baltimore, and we had the Baltimore cheating scandal. And you know what? And I don't know if I'm like trained not to give solutions. But what rings true for me is a couple things. The first thing is like Black people have historically never expected remedies to come from the system, right? That restoration process has happened outside of the structures that were designed for them. And another thing that sticks out to me is, you know, over the course of my career, I've seen just so many, you know, quick fixes, bandages, come in the way of reforms. You know, if No Child Left Behind, if we can just get the kids to do the test, and if we can, I mean, even the charter school debate, like there's always just some experiment riding on the backs of Black children, right? Like No Child Left Behind was always about like, if we can bring them up, everyone else is successful. And what I've observed and what really dawned on me when we were writing this book is like, when it goes well, it is the nation's achievement. When it goes poorly, it is the Black children's failure, right? And so, you know, but no one has learned that lesson. Like there's not, I mean, and the Atlanta cheating scandal, you know, illustrates that so profoundly. Like people's lives are forever altered, and not just any people, right? Like by this one snapshot in time where there were these punishing pressures on a subset of schools to prove themselves, to be seen as equitable to the rest of the country. And when it didn't happen, they were just vilified and left to their own devices. And so for, you know, and that is what happened to T.M. Landry, right? Like, you know, I mean, and so, you know, what will make a more just and I don't, like, we've been through this for like 200 years. It's like the country has this cycle where there's like this contraction of progress, and then everything seems okay for a couple of years, and then all of a sudden there's just stagnation and regression. We're seeing that now, and you know, it's just this cycle, especially for Black students, I would say since Brown v. Board, where it's just, you know, there's like a level of desperation that brings about change, and then there's disinvestment that brings about failure, and then there's just like disillusionment. And I think that that's the cycle you'll see, not just in T.M. Landry, but in the historical parallel that we lay out for you.
We'll take one more question, but just because I'm a civil rights lawyer who is married to an education civil rights lawyer, you've just painted it's an important story and backdrop, but it's also important, of course, to remember that there has been a real struggle to address structural inequality in education and segregated schools. And the pain here is that we remain today, these many decades after Brown versus Board of Education, more segregated, not less. And we can't get into all of the reasons, but I want to emphasize that there's been so much also work done by people who refuse to accept the status quo, who through litigation and local organizing are fighting to make that change in local school districts. And they're using the courts, but it has become, we are absolutely in a time of deep regression and backlash. And against this incredibly entrenched history that folks are constantly confronting. But people are not sitting on their hands and accepting this, or not everyone is, for the status quo. Can I get your last question. Were you going to ask a question? Yeah.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
You mentioned a couple of times that you wanted to quit. Can you take us through a moment where, like, what triggered that, and most importantly, like, what brought you back to it? How you kind of worked through the will to quit and realizing that no, this is something you need to do.
Yeah, I just did not want to be associated with any student getting kicked out of school. And when I called one particular school, should I say which one? No? Okay. In New York City, they were really angry. And I will never forget, like, the person that I was talking to expressed frustration that there had been all of this pressure to diversify, and look what happened. And I was like, I'm done. Like, I was like, I see where this is. Like, I can't. Like, and then to just say it to me was just wild. But like, and I don't think they said off the record first. But it just gave me. I just could not. I knew there were 3 students at that school, and I just couldn't have my name on something that was going to result in clearly, this disdain that this story and what had happened to them had brought out of this very powerful person. So that is definitely when I didn't want to be a part of this anymore. And I was talking to one of the students. It was Bryson, I can tell you that. And I expressed, I was like, yeah, I think like Katie's gonna take it over, and I'm gonna. And he was basically like, "Where are you going? Like, what are we doing? We've already done this. Like, we're in this together, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, but I had a very small child at the time too, and I tried to use that as an excuse." Because of course I wasn't going to fess up and say, I'm just like quitting on you because this is so hard. But he was just like, no, like, we started this, we're going to finish this. And I was like, yes, we are. And to be clear, like, he still remembers that story too. And he said, you can't leave us. Yeah, you can't leave us. And again, I'm the New York Times swooping into this small, like, town. They expected us to just leave them anyway. I care about children. I care about my job. I care about the truth, and I care about justice in whatever form. I really believe that. So yeah, Bryson brought me back. He brought me on back to Louisiana. And I just want to say something real quick. Like, it's just also, maybe I know I'm like such a Debbie Downer, but like, and my last little monologue, thank you for bearing with me. But we talk about how like these images of Black children throughout history like become these like these relief valves. Like Rudy Bridges like walking into school is like, okay, we can do this. The first Black students to integrate like Ole Miss were like, yeah, we can do this, and we hang so much on this like, but she walked into a Louisiana school like under a deseg order. Do you know the first state that was just relieved of their deseg order? It was Louisiana, just like a few months ago. And so if you want to know why I just feel so pessimistic, is because it's like you just see it just repeating.
Oh, we can't end on that note. We
Sorry.
absolutely
It's a
cannot.
hopeful
I will
note.
just
You're the
say,
hopeful one.
you can't be a civil rights lawyer without this profound well of
You have
hope,
to be
because
very
you
optimistic.
start with with deeply entrenched problems, and you just work and get creative and think it through. And there's absolutely every reason. And I can, Jenny Yang's in the audience and many others who've worked for decades to dismantle. But yeah, it's an incredibly scary time on these issues, but there's actually a lot of good things still happening outside of Washington.
Yeah, and
So yeah, go ahead.
I
You
think-
get the final word.
Well, I think one of the things the Trump era has showed us is that I don't know if I should say this, but for the left, for the Democrats, to have such unified control of whether it's the Supreme Court, federal government, the White House, Congress, over a series of decades, I think led people on the left to believe that a lot of the fight was done. And that's not just about race, it's about abortion, it's about, women's rights, it's about civil rights, it's about civil liberties. And then we see that actually at the state level and at the local level, a tremendous amount of work was being done by the right to undermine everything that was happening at the federal level anyway. And so when Trump wins in 2016, so much of what he wanted to get done had already been done by state houses all over the country. So when I think about the fact that there's control now here in DC, Trump is in control, what he would like to do, especially with immigration, I think speaks deeply to how we decide who belongs in the US and who doesn't, what you look like when you're an American. I think there's so much work that can be done at the local level. That's a playbook that's not owned by any party. Yeah. That playbook is owned by whoever can be organized and dedicated. If the Republicans can fight for 30 years to undo abortion, it took them a really long time to succeed, but they stuck with it. And there are a lot of things that I can quibble with them on policy, but I do appreciate that kind of dedication. And so I think that if we really care about opportunity for people in America who there are lots of powers trying to strip opportunity from, I think that is a local fight. I think it's a fight at the governor's mansion level, at the city council level, at the school board level, because what is happening here is extremely important, which is why Vanita has to fight that fight. I'm so sorry. But for the rest of us who are not Vanita Gupta, former head of the Civil Rights Division in the Justice Department, we have other tools, and we have to win at the state level because states' rights can go both ways. It doesn't have to go the way it's been in the past. We can change that.
Okay. Wow.
Wait.
Oh.
And the kids are all right. They're all right.
Read the book because the kids are great.
You should read they're so much more hopeful
Yes,
than
the
we
end
are.
of the book got profiles of where the students are today, and it's actually, for the most part, deeply inspiring. So thank you for sticking with
you,
it
guys.
and writing
Yes,
this
thank
amazing
you.
book. It really is. It's a fast read, too, so I would urge all of you to get this book and share it with your friends. It's a really important story, especially in a time where our news is flooded with everything else, to not forget these kids.